Hello and welcome to our channel 12344567810. I'm Nick and I'll be your interviewer for two interviews today. And our other interviewer, Michael, will do our last interview. We will be having interviews with the people who had helped making our Constitution. They are James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and George Washington. Hello, I'm here with the father of the Constitution, James Madison. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
As well. So, what is this Constitutional Convention about?
Well, the Constitution Convention was a convention that I attended in Philadelphia from May 27th to the 17th of September. It was extremely hot during that convention, and it was very uncomfortable there with the other delegates. I was actually there with 54 other delegates to change the Articles of Confederation. But we eventually just scrapped the articles and made a new constitution. We did this because the articles did not give enough power to the federal government, and also because of Shays' Rebellion. That rebellion was a group of protesters that were led by Daniel Shays, who was a Revolutionary War veteran. The rebellion proved that we need a strong central government, and it was too weak.
I see. What role did you play at the convention?
Well, at the convention, I proposed the Virginia Plan. And in my plan, I proposed a government that was divided between three branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. I also proposed a bicameral legislature that has a House of Representatives and a Senate. The states that have the most population has more power in both the House of Representatives and Senate. I also brought up another feature, which is that the National Congress would have the power to veto state laws. I also kept a lot of paper with me at the convention because I took many notes there.
What happened with the plan you proposed at the convention?
Well, not all the delegates there liked my plan, and so another delegate, William Patterson, he proposed the New Jersey plan. That plan proposed that we have a unicameral legislature representing the states as equal, even if they are very small and don't have a lot of population there. The plan also proposed that the states remain sovereign and the national government have little power, not a lot. I still believe that my plan, the Virginia plan, was better.
How did you all reach an agreement?
Well, we made a compromise between the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan. We called this compromise the Great Compromise, or it is known as the Connecticut Compromise, because it was led by a delegate by the name of Roger Sherman of Connecticut. In keeping the New Jersey plan, the Senate would have 2 senators per state, regardless of the size of the population. In keeping my plan, the House of Representatives will represent population. So the more population in your state, the more power you would have there. And in the compromise, the federal government gets more power, but not enough power to overrule the states. The veto over state laws was abandoned, and under the compromise, the federal government can only restrict certain laws. Because of this, we support a system known as federalism, which is divided power between the state governments and federal governments.
Wow, well, I'd say that's a great compromise.
Yes, it is.
So, what's going on with the South and the North? They've been at each other's heads lately.
Yeah, well, the southern delegates had feared about future domination by the northern states because they had more free people. And they thought by the northerners having more power, they will get rid of the slave system. And I believe some of the southern delegates were going to walk out of the convention if the Constitution doesn't protect the institution of slavery at all. I didn't want the southerners to reject the Constitution, but I despise slavery even though I own slaves.
So, how did you delegates fix this?
First, we made the Constitution forbade Congress from blocking the importation of slaves. Then we decided to make another compromise, and this compromise is known as the 3/5 compromise. In this compromise, each slave is counted 3/5 of a person. This will help the Southerners with more population and have more power in the House of Representatives. And then finally, the Constitution committed all states to return runaway slaves back to their owner. So if a slave would go run away from their owner and go into a free state, they are still considered a slave and they need to be brought back to their owner.
How did the convention end?
Well, the convention concluded with 41 delegates, and many delegates they didn't really like the compromises, and I too didn't like all the compromises there. But Franklin and Alexander Hamilton persuaded many delegates and I to accept this new Constitution instead of the Articles of Confederation. In the end, 39 of us delegates signed the document, and three others didn't sign it, and those three were Edmund Randolph, Elbridge Gerry, and George Mason.
Well, thank you for your time today. It's been a great pleasure having you.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, moving on, next we have Alexander Hamilton. I'm here with another delegate, Alexander Hamilton. How are you doing this fine evening?
I'm doing fine.
So let's talk about the ratification of the Constitution. So, who were the Federalists?
Well, the Federalists were the people who have favored the ratification of the Constitution. Federalists included George Washington, James Madison, and me, and we stressed the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation.
And so, who are the Anti-Feds?
Anti-Federalists were people who didn't want the Constitution to be ratified. Many of the Anti-Federalists believed that the Constitution increased the powers of the central government too much. And some of the Anti-Feds were Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, John Hancock, George Clinton, and Richard Henry Lee. But those Anti-Feds were wrong about the Constitution, and I believe not many of them understood it too well.
So, how did the Federalists get support for the ratification of the Constitution?
Well, we had the two most popular and trusted men in America on our side, and they were George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. We also got support from urban artisans. Those artisans hoped that a strong national government could expand American commerce. We also had ratifying conventions at seaports, and the seaports had most of the nation's newspapers. The printers strongly endorsed the Constitution. So we had a lot of support, and the Anti-Federalists didn't really have a lot.
What were the Federalist Papers?
Oh, the Federalist Papers were a collection of essays that I wrote with James Madison and John Jay. They were published in New York during a time of heated debate over ratifying the Constitution. The papers were a series of 85 essays, and these essays were made to change the minds of the Anti-Federalists.
What were in those essays?
Well, in our essays, we said that we need to have a strong central government. And if we don't have a strong central government, we fear that the United States would dissolve if it doesn't have it. We also argued that the checks and balances in the Constitution would prevent the legislature, judicial, and executive branches from gaining too much power. We also wrote that the real threat was the state legislatures because it didn't have good checks and balances. I also wrote about why the judicial branch is very important. These essays help people who didn't understand the Constitution too well, and they also help get the Constitution ratified.
That was very important. All right, well, that's all the time we have. Thank you for the time you gave us for the interview, James.
Yeah, no problem.
Next, we have Michael interviewing George Washington.
Hello, Michael here reporting for channel 12344567810, and I'm here with George Washington. He was also at the Constitutional Convention. And how you doing, George?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Michael?
Pretty good. George, what did you do at the Constitutional Convention?
Well, first I didn't really want to go to the convention, but I was persuaded by James Madison. And I went to the convention, and I was soon made the president of the convention.
You were also at the First Continental Congress.
That is correct.
Well, what was the Continental Congress about?
Well, the Continental Congress was a meeting of delegates from the 13 colonies except Georgia in the fall of 1774. We all went to Philadelphia and Pennsylvania for the meeting. What made us have this meeting was the coercive acts made by Britain after the Boston Tea Party. Their acts forced our colonists to house British troops and allowed British officials to be tried in Britain for crimes committed in the colonies. It also closed the Boston Harbor and Boston Town Hall meetings.
So what was the outcome of the Continental Congress?
Well, to make the Parlement withdraw the coercive acts, we announced a boycott of British imports.
So what were the similarities and differences between the Constitutional Convention and the Continental Congress?
Well, both meetings were held in Philadelphia, but both had differences, different reasons for having the meetings. The Continental Congress wanted to get revised on the intolerable acts, and the Constitutional Convention didn't want to have the Articles of Confederation anymore.
Let's talk about the Constitution now. You are a Federalist, correct?
Yes, I believe that we needed a new constitution for the United States to work properly. I also believe that we needed a strong central government.
What are some of the principles of the Constitution?
Well, some of the principles are limited government, popular sovereignty, separation of powers, and checks and balances. The Constitution obeys popular sovereignty, which is the government power comes from the people. It also makes certain that the government's power is limited. The Constitution also shows a limited government by specifically stating that what powers the government has. The Constitution also establishes a system of checks and balances, which is made to prevent a branch from having too much power.
Well, thanks, George, for the interview. And thanks for tuning in to channel 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. And that was our coverage of what happened at the Constitutional Convention and about the Constitution.